Usually when you step into a funeral, there's this intense, heavy focus on the person who passed away.
Right, the entire environment is just completely choreographed around them.
Exactly. I mean, picture the scene. You're standing in this hushed, dimly lit room. You can see the polished wood of the casket up at the front. You hear those muffled sobs, people quietly shuffling their shoes on the carpet.
Yeah, and eventually you step forward, you bow your head.
Right. You might light a stick of incense, watch the smoke curl up, or just say a silent prayer. And we've repeated this exact sequence of events with, minor variations for centuries.
Literally centuries. Every movement, every spoken word, even the silences, they're all directed toward the center of that room, toward the deceased.
But if you step out of that script for just a fraction of a second, the source text we're looking at today brings up a really slightly uncomfortable question.
Oh, it really does.
Because the person resting in that room, they can't see the floral arrangements, they can't smell the sandalwood incense, they don't perceive the heavy, solemn presence of everyone gathered there.
Right, they're completely separated from the physical experience of the room.
Exactly. So the provocative question here is, if the deceased is entirely separated from all this, who are these elaborate rituals actually serving?
And that shift in perspective just completely upends how we understand mourning, which is really the focal point of our deep dive today.
We are diving into a profoundly moving essay that uses existentialism, psychology, sociology, and even stoicism to unpack the true purpose of death rituals.
Yeah, and by running this really familiar scenario through those frameworks, the text exposes the hidden, highly functional architecture of how we grieve.
It's fascinating, and it opens with this premise from Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus that feels honestly incredibly counterintuitive at first glance.
Right, they argue that death doesn't actually belong to the dead.
Wait, what does that actually mean? Because that sounds like a paradox.
Well, think about it. The dead don't possess the capacity to experience their own absence, right? They aren't floating in some void feeling gone.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see.
Yeah, the experience of absence is thrust entirely upon the living. The people left behind are the ones forced to stand at the edge of this terrifying concrete void.
So lighting the incense, the memorials, none of that is a message transmitted to the great beyond.
Exactly. It's psychological scaffolding. It's
Right.
built purely so the living can survive that void.
Which makes so much sense. And if we accept that this scaffolding is built exclusively for us, the living, we have to look at what's happening inside the mind of someone who is grieving.
Right, the internal environment.
Yeah, and the essay dives into this by leaning heavily on Sigmund Freud's early definitions of mourning. He framed mourning not just as being sad, as a grueling, active labor.
Freud made this really crucial distinction between feeling sad and the actual work of mourning.
The work of it.
Yeah, because when you love someone, your mind weaves them into your own identity. You invest an enormous amount of psychic energy into your mental representation of that person.
Okay.
So when they die, reality demands that you withdraw all of that energy. The mind has to systematically detach from an entity that was fundamentally a part of your self-concept.
And the visceral examples in the text really capture how painful that detachment is. It's that moment you reach into your pocket, grab your phone to text them a joke out of pure muscle memory.
And your thumb just hovers over the screen.
Yes! You freeze, your brain makes a prediction based on years of ingrained data, and then reality violently rejects that prediction.
It's awful. Or, walking past a cafe you used to go to together. The smell of the coffee, the layout of the table, sensory cues, tell your brain to expect them.
Right, it operates like a severe cognitive glitch, like your brain's map of the world is suddenly outdated, and it just hasn't downloaded the software patch yet to accommodate this massive absence.
Exactly. The essay compares it to a phantom limb, except instead of a missing arm or leg, it's a missing person. You feel the itch of their presence, but there's nothing there to scratch.
That is such a haunting way to put it.
It is. And every single time that predictive failure happens, the mind is forced to process the severing of the tie all over again. Freud noted that humans naturally rebel against this.
Because it hurts.
Right. We don't want to let go. So we initially turn away from reality and cling to the internal mental image.
Which is exhausting. Just the sheer mental caloric burn of constantly colliding with a broken reality and then having to retreat and recalibrate. No wonder grief makes you physically tired.
Exactly. And that phantom limb phenomena really exposes our vulnerability. Sartre expanded on this by pointing out that humans are mostly constructed by our relations to others.
Our identity is basically a mosaic of our interactions.
Yeah, our shared histories, our social roles. When a core person vanishes, a vital piece of your mosaic falls out. You're left staring into this absolute permanence that you can't alter.
Which brings in Friedrich Nietzsche's observation about human endurance. Standing completely helpless in front of an unchangeable, permanent void is essentially a recipe for psychological collapse.
Nietzsche suggested we are profoundly ill-equipped to survive total, unstructured meaninglessness. We just can't tolerate a complete lack of control paired with the lack of meaning.
So faced with an absolute void, the mind desperately searches for a structure to impose on the chaos.
Without a framework, the dread of that passivity would literally drive us toward madness.
And this is the real aha moment in the text for me. This dread is the true engine behind our rituals.
Yes, exactly.
Like when you stand in that hushed room and light a candle, you aren't using logic. You don't actually believe the wax in the flame will reverse biological death.
No, you're operating under a primal imperative to shift out of crushing passivity. The ritual provides an action. It gives your hand something to do.
It gives your mind a focal point, interrupting that paralyzing helplessness.
Right. The physical action acts as an anchor. By performing a highly structured movement, bowing, chanting, lighting incense, you force your body to act in accordance with the new reality.
It's a step-by-step process of convincing your own glitching mind that the person is gone. You're using action as the bridge between the old map and the new map.
Precisely.
But, okay, let me push back a bit here, or at least pivot. Pulling the camera back from that deeply internal personal glitch presents a glaring contradiction.
What do you mean?
Well, if grief is this idiosyncratic, deeply personal shattering of my internal map, why do all our rituals look identical?
Ah, right.
If the goal is just to help my specific brain update its software, my ritual shouldn't look exactly like yours. Yet we all wear the exact same dark clothes, follow the same procession lines, say the same words.
To understand that uniformity, the essay shifts from a psychological lens to a sociological one. It brings in Karl Marx's perspective.
Okay, Marx, how does he fit into funerals?
Well, from the viewpoint of society as a functioning organism, a death isn't just a personal tragedy. It's a critical structural disruption.
Oh, like it removes a gear from the machine.
Exactly. It shatters the hierarchy of a family. It removes labor from a workforce. It creates a vacuum in a community. And society, as a self-preserving mechanism, cannot tolerate unchecked disruption.
It needs stability to survive.
Right. So society mandates standardized rituals to act as a stabilizing protocol. Emil Durkheim expanded on this with the idea of collective effervescence.
Collective effervescence. That sounds oddly uplifting.
It does. It's what happens when an entire community gathers, adheres to a strict dress code, and synchronizes their behavior in a shared space. They're performing a collective validation.
So the uniform script is basically the community silently saying, we acknowledge this rupture, the loss is real, you aren't hallucinating this pain, and we've got you.
Yes. The social order will hold you while you adapt.
Okay, that actually has a certain warmth to it. It sounds genuinely supportive.
It is, but the essay complicates that warmth by introducing Michel Foucault and Max Weber, and their analysis reveals a mechanism that is significantly colder.
Uh-oh, why colder?
Because they argue these uniform rituals aren't just about support, they are a technology used by society to rigidly dictate the acceptable parameters of grief.
Oh, wow. So it's about control.
Very much so. They focus on this concept of scheduled mourning. Society doesn't just tell you how to mourn, it explicitly tells you when you are permitted to mourn.
And I'm guessing when you have to stop.
Exactly.
Isn't that incredibly restrictive? I mean, Foucault is basically saying society puts a tight leash on our most raw, unfiltered emotions.
It absolutely is a leash.
It's essentially mandating, like, you are authorized to weep openly between 2:00 p.m. and 4:00 p.m. on Tuesday at the memorial, but by Monday, you better be fully functional at your desk.
Yeah, it treats human devastation like a logistical hurdle.
That's pretty bleak.
It is bleak, but the text presents a really compelling defense of this sociological mold. The bureaucracy of sadness, as rigid as it seems, is actually a highly evolved survival mechanism.
Really? How so?
Think about the specific milestones in different cultures. The 49th day of mourning in many Buddhist practices, the 100-day mark, the formalized one-year anniversary.
Right, those are super common.
They aren't arbitrary calendar alerts. They function as emotional guardrails. If society didn't impose a definitive shape, a clear timeline, and strict boundaries around that chaotic energy, the raw emotion could just overflow.
Oh, I see. Prolonged, unmanaged grief would just paralyze the whole social order.
Exactly. Foucault's leech isn't inherently meant to be punitive. It's designed to prevent the grieving individual from drowning in their own sorrow and to stop the community from being pulled under with them.
So it creates a temporary, manageable container for an inherently unmanageable event.
You nailed it.
But those guardrails have an expiration date, which brings up the question, what happens when the societal authorization to grieve just expires?
That brings us to what the text calls the existential drop.
The existential drop, that sounds terrifying. The essay paints this picture of the house a few days after the formal services are over, and it's so heavy.
Yeah, the out-of-town relatives have caught their flights home. The casseroles and condolences have tapered off.
The meticulous schedule is gone. You aren't organizing the burial or notifying extended networks anymore. All that administrative burden of death, which kept you moving, just evaporates.
You're stripped of the title, organizer of the funeral, and you're simply a person sitting in a profoundly quiet room, fundamentally altered.
It's just silence. And Sartre's analysis of the buffer zone becomes so clear in this moment.
Because the frenetic activity of the funeral, the logistics, greeting the guests, it's basically a psychological anesthetic.
Right, it's a shield. As long as you're obsessing over whether the coffee is hot enough for the guests, you are successfully delaying the inevitable confrontation with the void.
But when that anesthetic finally wears off, Albert Camus's philosophy on the absurd snaps right into focus.
Right, because Camus suggested the true absurdity of death isn't the dying part. The supreme absurdity is the morning after.
Yes. The sun still relentlessly rises. The mail still gets delivered.
You still have to perform the incredibly mundane task of, like, making a piece of toast, forced to participate in a world that has been entirely rewritten without your consent.
It's maddening. You're required to maintain your existence without any cosmic explanation. No grand apology from the universe.
Which is where the essay brings in the Stoic perspective. Marcus Aurelius rigorously meditated on the absolute guarantee of impermanence.
He did. He trained his mind to expect loss as the natural default in the universe.
But the text points out a brutal reality about that Stoic preparation. Deeply understanding that everything is temporary doesn't actually neutralize the pain when that impermanence hits you.
No, it really doesn't. Knowing it intellectually doesn't serve as an epidural for emotional agony. You still bleed.
So this brings up a rather daunting question about the whole ritualistic process. When we were painstakingly arranging the flowers and obsessing over the eulogy and following the sociological script...
Were we actually confronting the reality of death?
Exactly. Or were we collectively constructing an elaborate ceremony just to hit the snooze button on the existential dread?
It's a heavy question.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we use rituals to momentarily bypass the void forces us to question if they are just empty pantomime.
Right. If the drop is inevitable and rituals don't magically fix anything, how do we engage with them without lying to ourselves?
The essay pivots here to a really practical Stoic application. The dividing line between a hollow pantomime and a vital coping tool is the concept of conscious action.
Conscious action.
Yeah.
So Sartre and Camus warn against confusing the ritual with an objective external truth.
Exactly. If you approach burning incense with the literal belief that the smoke is physically altering the universe or reaching the deceased in some tangible realm,
You're taking refuge in a delusion to avoid the pain. You're basically hiding.
right. However, if you perform that exact same physical action with the full conscious awareness that it's a psychological tool designed to anchor your own mind.
Then the ritual transforms into something incredibly powerful.
Exactly. Epictetus built his whole philosophy around this division of control. You have absolutely zero jurisdiction over the occurrence of loss. It's entirely outside of your command.
But what you do retain absolute unyielding control over is the architecture you build to process that loss.
Yes. And Seneca gives a stark warning about what happens if you fail to build that architecture.
What happens?
If you abandon the ritual because it feels logically empty and you just try to push past the pain, that raw, unprocessed grief doesn't just passively go away. It metastasizes.
Oh, wow. Like an infection.
Exactly. It quietly infects your behavioral patterns, your relationships, your baseline anxiety. The mind requires a designated repository for that immense psychic weight.
So the ritual functions as a container.
A container for the pain, yes.
And one of the most beautiful insights from the latter half of the essay is how it democratizes these containers. Like, society gives us the formal mold out of necessity, but a ritual doesn't require a church or an audience of hundreds to work.
Not at all. Stripped down to its core psychological utility, a ritual is simply a deliberate, conscious action repeated with intention.
Which means your container can be deeply intimate. It can be completely customized to the specific shape of your phantom limb.
It could just be the quiet act of brewing their favorite type of tea on a Sunday afternoon.
Or, listening to a specific album on your commute. Or deliberately walking a different route to pass a park bench they loved.
The scale of the action is completely irrelevant. The conscious intention behind it is everything.
So synthesizing all this, the psychology, the sociology, the Stoic frameworks, it reveals the ultimate finding of the text. We don't do these things to bridge the gap between the living and the dead.
We don't perform them to call the dead back into our reality.
We perform them so their imprint on our reality doesn't dissolve into the chaos of moving forward. We create these deliberate structures to give the memory a physical location in the present tense.
It takes the frantic, glitching energy of a mind searching for a ghost and grounds it into a specific time and action. You are carving out a psychological sanctuary.
Allowing you to carry the weight of that connection in a new, manageable shape rather than an open wound.
You're practicing the ritual to learn the complex skill of living alongside the pain without letting it destroy your capacity to function.
When you pull all those perspectives together, it completely shifts how you view our oldest traditions. I mean, the next time you find yourself at a memorial service, you won't just see the burning incense and the dark clothes as hollow obligations.
You will recognize them as essential survival mechanisms.
Exactly. There are spaces we carve out of an indifferent universe to ensure death doesn't paralyze the living. They're the tools we use to keep the internal thread of connection intact, even when the person on the other end is permanently gone.
And that realization leaves us with a deeply philosophical question from the final pages of the text. It asks us to ruthlessly examine our motivations. When you stand in a formalized ritual for the lost, are you truly attempting to honor and connect with them? Or are you ultimately just trying to build a structure that makes their absolute absence bearable for yourself?
That is such a profound thing to sit with. And honestly, stepping entirely outside the context of a funeral parlor, you can apply that exact same lens to the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the daily habits, the repetitive routines, the small, rigid schedules you desperately cling to when your own life feels like it's spinning out of control. Ask yourself, which of your everyday rituals are you performing right now, not because they actually change the chaotic world around you, but simply because the physical act of doing them is the only thing making an unpredictable reality bearable?